In today's video, I am painting a portrait using only the colors red and my beautiful palette knife inspired by the Lunar New Year and of course the lucky color red that is very prominent and very vibrant during those celebrations. So stick around for painting a portrait all in red. Good day everyone and welcome to another creative video. Thank you all for joining me. Absolute pleasure to be here with you today. As you saw by the introduction of the video, today is all about painting a portrait utilizing only one color. In this case, it's the color red. Now I'm going to be showing you a variety of different reds, but ultimately it's a monochromatic painting of a portrait, which is the one behind me. I'm going to document two different portraits, and again, it's only using the color red. So in the first portrait, I have already painted that, and I'll show you the process of what that looks like. In the second portrait, I'll do my best to narrate the process and give you a little bit more detail in what exactly I'm doing. Now, just bear in mind, it's extremely challenging to narrate and paint at the same time because you're using different parts of your brain, and ultimately I'm taking myself out of the creative process and then starting that back up again, if that makes sense. I might have talked about this before or not, just on a different tangent. It's really important that when you do paint, you have uninterrupted painting time in your studio. How your mind works and the process of painting, it's really a flow, a mechanical process. Actually, mechanical is not a right word, but it's a process where when you interrupt somebody, it's like, you know, hammer to the head, because there's so many things happening in your mind as you're painting in terms of the tones, shadows, highlights, edges, soft or hard, and all these things that you have to do, that takes part in your mind first and foremost before you actually apply painting. So when that's interrupted every single time, you have to start again, and it's almost like, you know, you put the brakes on and think, okay, where was I? What am I doing now? So ergo, I will do my best to narrate. If I don't narrate in the moment, I'll just narrate with a voiceover just to give you a little bit more detail. But I'll see how I go. I'm not quite sure at this point. I'll do my best. The other aspect of all of this is the lighting is always a challenge for me in the studio. Today is really overcast. In fact, we had some severe thunderstorms last night. So therefore, I don't have sunlight coming through the window, which is the majority of my light source. So I have to rely on three different light sources. One's from above. I've got a studio light to my right hand, and I've got something else in front of me, in order to give you enough light to be able to translate the colors and the tones and for you to see the process. So as always, it really does depend how you're viewing on the other side, but certainly I'll do my best to give you as much of that crisp and clarity as possible as I'm going along. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to ask, and I'll do my best to give you as much information as I possibly could and know over the last 2 decades of accumulated knowledge of art and art practice. So if you're not familiar with the different type of reds, as you know, there are many, but I tend to use the ones that are more of a high potency or series 4. So that's your cadmiums and your stronger pigment reds. I'll take you through them and what they are one by one. But ultimately, one is a warmer red and the other two, I believe, in the cooler family. And it's really important to work with cool and warm reds because that will give you an opportunity to understand, you know, being able to mix colors that are in the distance and colors that should be in the foreground. That same ideology applies to portraits, not just landscapes. So when you start to understand colors, please be mindful that not all reds are made the same, and ergo why you perhaps want to understand the reds that you're painting with before you attempt using three different reds, that is. At the same time, you don't have to use 3 different reds. You can just use one in a white, and then that will equally give you an opportunity to learn how to mix color, how to mix tones, and be able to then give you a much deeper understanding in creating a portrait. Again, landscapes or still lifes, it doesn't matter. It is a little bit more challenging creating portraits because you have to pay attention to every part of the face in terms of whether that aspect of the face is sitting back, middle, or foreground. I know that's a really weird thing to explain verbally. Again, I'll do my best to give you a little bit more information on how that works. But when you understand where each part of the face sits, then you'll understand whether or not you should push it back into the background or bring it forward into the foreground. So enough talking, and let's get through to painting, and hopefully I'll give you as best as I can information throughout the process. Okay, so the three different reds that I'll be using is a cadmium red, Venetian red, and a permanent magenta. Now these two up here are Michael Harding oil colors. They are absolutely majestic in terms of using them. And permanent magenta is an Art Spectrum brand. Now I've had these for a little while, so for me, Michael Harding is worth purchasing if you can. They have a lot stronger pigment, natural oils within them. So yeah, I can't recommend them strong enough. By the way, again, not affiliated with Michael Harding. I just certainly prefer his paint. Permanent magenta in terms of oil spectrum or art spectrum, sorry, is quite good as well. So these, I consider them to be another good quality paint if you're starting out. They're certainly a lot more affordable in terms of starting your oil painting journey. But in terms of pigment and how they behave, Michael Harding is really a top-rated product. Now, in terms of their warm and cool shades or chroma, cadmium red is considered a warm red. Permanent magenta is considered a cool red. Now, Venetian red, I feel it's a warm red in the warm color family. I'm not quite sure. I didn't quite look this up, or I didn't look at its makeup, to be honest. But I feel that that's in a warm family, because I've got another red that I use from Michael Harding, and that's in a cool red category. Yeah, so here's the other Michael Harding, which is an Indian red, and I'm pretty sure that sits in the cool category. So why is it that you'd use these type of reds? Well, again, when you understand painting, and painting particularly with oils, which I absolutely love, it makes it easier to then create tones that are background, middle ground, and foreground, and which is then why it gives you the ability to bring something out of 1D into 3D. Again, discussing colors and mixing and creating tones and shades is a very much an in-depth process, but just in terms of what's in the warm family, well, these are in the warm, and these two for me would be in the cool. Now today, I'm not using Indian red. I'm quite happy just to use permanent magenta. So these are the three reds that we're going to use for painting this portrait. Now the actual cadmium red from Michael Harding, it's incredibly pigmented. I mean, you don't have to use a lot of it to create, I don't know if we can bring that up, look at that, to create a quite intense and vibrant tone. So again, what's the difference between paints? Well, not all oil paints are made the same, and the natural pigment and the natural oils in them are just absolutely magnificent. Now, I only put out a little bit, one, because the painting is quite small, but second, again, you don't need a lot in order to make that color go a long way. Now, because I'm painting with a palette knife, I've put out a little bit more in respect to the canvas size. So that's why I've got that much there. But again, you can assess that as you're painting, how much you do or don't need. I've got a little bit already here from the other day of Venetian red, but I might just put a little bit more. This particular Venetian red has got a lot of oil in it, or at least my tube does. So I'm very careful not to squeeze out too much. Because again, a little bit goes a long way with these oil paints. And this one is now permanent magenta, and we'll pop that in there as well. Now, I've always talked about advocating putting your paint in a certain lineup. I've just started mine like this, and I'm now used to it for the last 20 years. So that's why mine is bit of a jigsaw. But truly, if you're starting from the beginning, please make sure that you have a lineup from your lightest lights, your reds, your blues, your greens, etc. Go in a more orderly fashion. And the reason for that is that when you start to paint and you pick your paint, you'll know exactly what you need, and it becomes an automatic process versus stopping and starting to see where your colors are at. So as with any oil painting, really any painting in general, we have to consider the fact that we're using only 3 different reds. And so I need to look at what will be my darkest dark. And in this case, it will be permanent magenta. And there it is there. So that will be the darkest dark that I will use in the portrait. From there, I can then start to mix all my different color tones to apply as I'm going along. So just keep in mind that whenever you're starting only using 3 different reds, or whether it's just one red, the foundation of your darkest dark would be the actual color. So you can't mix that, say, for example, with a blue in order to get a darker than that. So just bear that in mind as we're going along. Ultimately, that's what makes monochromatic paintings really nice as well, because we are not reliant on any other color other than the chroma of the red itself. So the darkest dark will be that permanent magenta. Now from there, I've started already this one here. I've mixed a little bit of cadmium red with white. And so now I'm working on getting different tonal values for the portrait. I'm not quite certain exactly how dark or light I'll make it, but I love mixing different color tones before I start to paint, just so that I can almost, it's like you're warming up before you start painting by mixing in the color tones. At least for me, that's what I find exciting, is to play with color first before I start painting. Here's my Venetian red, and I'm going to add a little bit of white to that as well. Now again, this is quite a strong chroma. The pigment in this Michael Harding are quite beautiful. So I've added a little bit of white there. It doesn't actually make a huge difference. You'd have to add a little bit more, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm just going to take it down to the next value, and by adding a lot more white is when you'll start to see the color change, as you see here now. Okay, so that's as far as I'm going to go using the brush, and now I'm going to switch over to the palette knife and start to add the shapes of the darkest darks. Now, one of the things that I'm not quite certain of as yet is just how dark I want the darkest darks to be. So I'm just going to play around using the permanent magenta and cadmium red just to see what I can achieve in terms of the darkest value that I am happy with putting on this portrait. I've added a little bit of white in this one value, which I'm not quite liking it, but I'm going to go with it and see how I go. Now the thing is, when you're painting with a palette knife, you really do have to be mindful of every shape that you add, because you run into the challenge of painting over what you've already done. Sometimes that's a nice thing, but sometimes you really don't want to ruin the shape of something, because then you lose the form of what that individual is going to look like, and it doesn't really look like themselves at all. So you just have to be mindful of every single mark that you make through each process. Now, this beginning stage for me is quite delicate. It takes me a little while to maneuver through it, and that's purely because, again, I want to maintain shape. I've gone over that. And the character of this individual. Otherwise, yeah, it doesn't really look like them. Painting with a palette knife is quite immediate, and I quite like that process. And it's not a realism portrait, so I accept that, and people that commission my work know that. That's what makes it, I think, quite nice. However, no matter whether you're using a palette knife or brush, you still want to make sure that you retain that individual authenticity of the person that you're painting. Otherwise, you make them look like a totally different person. Now, I've talked about this before. Every time you mix a new color, always assess it against the last color tone that you did. That will give you a really good guide as to whether or not it's going to work. My next color tone here is going to be permanent magenta mixed with cadmium red to create the distance of the face curving. So by putting a distant cool color, that's going to give me that curvature that's going to make it look like a face. So in this case, I've mixed a permanent magenta with the cadmium red and white, and that's going to be this next color tone. So as I go along, I need to make sure not to lose the actual frame of this person's face. I have noticed that these here, the eyebrows are not as dark, so I need to make sure that I maintain that. But once hopefully I put the next tone here, that will all make sense. Just on a side note too, by the way, I've talked about how do you know where to apply color. That's distance, middle ground and foreground. If I was just to let you know about the eye as an example, let me actually zoom in so you can see better. If I was just to focus on the eye's got three planes, one going this way, one up the top, and one going down. If we're now looking at those shapes as in up or that way, and that way, the top part up here is what's considered the top part of the eyelid is in the foreground. That's coming close to you. So that part of the eye, the shape and the shadow that you need to make needs to be in the warm color family. And that ideology then is found all over the face. This part of the cheek is furthest away from the nose, so it's more in the distant. The front of it is protruding forward, and then you've got a little bit that goes in towards the nose. That's also cool. And so if you then look at the nose as well, the tip of the nose is the most furthest protruding on a face, and that's in the warm color family. What I'll do is I'll put in a face mask or face map, and I'll show you what that looks like so you've got that imprinted in your mind, and then you'll know once you start to paint how easy it is to use a palette knife, because all you're doing is you're focusing on every different plane within each section of the face, and that's how you know whether you have to create a warm or a cool color tone.
So here's a really good example of different face planes that you will probably need to get familiar with. So if I focus on the left eye up here, you'll start to see that there are 3 different sections that let you know whether a plane within that section is cool or warm. So if you think about what is the first part of that eye that is closer to us, you'll know that the top eyelid protrudes further than the sides of that section. For example, same with the nose. If we look at the nose here, this front facing part, or the tip of the nose, is the closest to us, so it sits in the foreground, while the side planes sit in the cool background. So let's have a look to see now with a color tone and what that would look like. So we know that the blue is going to be in the cool, as is this side here on this side, and as is the side of the nose up here. And the moment I now switch to the orange, you'll start to see how it would look like when you apply your palette knife. These portions here are going to be closest to us in the foreground, so they're going to be in the warmer color tones. This is a really good example that gives you a great map in understanding how to work with your palette knife, and also what tonal value to assign to different parts of the face. As you can see also in the forehead, the side of the cheek, the mouth region, the chin region, and the neck region also give you the idea of those different planes, and therefore having a much better understanding whether your tone is in the cool or the warm color family. So just make sure that when you are painting portraits, you don't lose yourself in memorizing the planes of a face of only a front facing portrait. Also get to understand side facing, or when someone looks up or when someone looks down. They always change, but the really important aspect here is to understand how each part of a plane is denoted on your face. It's almost like a map within the face that you're painting, and that will give you such great depth to be then able to know, right, what color am I mixing, warm or cold, and then start from that process. And ultimately, knowing how muscles also work within each plane will teach you how to move your palette knife around, and so that you have variety in your technique when you paint with a knife versus only in one direction, which sometimes can make a portrait look very plain and dull in terms of how it presents itself to the viewer. So study the planes of the face, and the rest will slowly begin to make sense as you're painting.
So the next color down is going to be a little bit warmer, and that's just going to be for me the cadmium red. That's it. Now, of course, if I was using yellow, that would even amplify that warmth, but in this case, the warmest that I've got is a cadmium red, and that's going to be that top shadow on the eyelid up here, which is going to be like a highlight. There we go. Okay. Now, because this part here is moving down into a cooler tone, I'm going to add a little bit of permanent magenta into that same color here, and that's going to make the eye go slope down. It might be a little bit challenging to see the exact colors, but I'm hoping you can see the difference between this one up here and then the one down here. Okay, I'm going to leave it here in terms of narrating this portrait directly. I might put some narrating over as I edit this video, but I'm just going to continue painting it now and complete the process of painting this portrait using the 3 red colors. Thank you all for joining in. Thank you for your time and your patience, and thank you for dedicating your time to watching all my work and my videos. I truly do hope that I inspire you with a small nugget of joy for you to take your first step forward if you're not already doing that, to paint, but also to encourage you to paint daily, if not twice or 3 times weekly. It really does add to a lot more peaceful set of mind and a peaceful existence. Life can be quite challenging, but when you place yourself into the creative aspect of your week, when you place your mind in creativity, it really does quiet down all those challenges and all those negative and limiting beliefs that we all carry. So do yourself the favor and give yourself that opportunity to be in joy, to create in joy, and to live with joy. As always, remember that while you're in this world, you are the light of the world. Create, do, be you, amplify more of who you are. And until next time, guys, bye.